Hello and welcome back to Coffee with Father Ryan. I am Jonathan Blevins, and I am, of course, joined by our very own Father Ryan, who is
Nice
indeed
to meet
drinking
you.
coffee
I am. It's very good coffee.
with a mug that says your name on it.
It does, yeah, just in case I forget it.
It looks like you might be reading something on the back of that mug. What would that be?
This is a little bit of a Confucius quote. It says, choose a job that you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life, which is kind of how I feel.
Confucius. I love it. I feel the same way. I tell Father Matt all the time. It never feels like work.
Yeah,
It's beautiful. How are you doing today? We're like 50 plus something days into quarantine now, which is crazy.
I know. I'm doing well. Glad I have the coffee for a pick-me-up.
Yeah, I think I should have had one before this video. I've only had one cup today, so I'll have to do it after today's video recording day. So we have a couple more we're doing, which will be fun.
I might need a cup after this recording.
From being with me,
Yeah,
it's okay. I understand. I have that effect on people.
yeah,
We
drain better.
we are going to dive right in. And one thing that speaking of just being on quarantine for 50 plus days, one of the things I've seen floating around all over social media and just having questions asked by former teenagers from youth ministry or from parishioners or from people really all over on social media is why can't we go to the sacrament of confession virtually? So take it away, tackle it.
Oh, a question for me. Uh, well, in a sense, because it ceases to be a sacrament then. Sacraments are something to be received, they're something tangible. So, as we talked about last week with spiritual communion, there's this underlying reality to the sacraments that we celebrate. And that's really what we're receiving. It's the grace that we're receiving, and it's something that is not confined necessarily to those particular tangible means. So, spiritual communion, we could have legitimate communion with God without having sacramental communion, because God is not limited to only being present in what was bread or what was wine. It's the same thing, I think, with confession, the sacrament of reconciliation, is that part of the experience is sacramental because you're in the presence of one who is mediating the presence of God and church. The priest is representing both God and church, reconciling the one who comes to both God and church. So to do it virtually would cease to be sacramental, but thankfully again, God is not confined only to that box or only to those words
Yeah,
or
so
or being present.
go into more of what that means. So I've had someone reach out and I've gotten to have some good conversation with them. I'd love to hear how you answer it. They want to go to confession. They feel like they need to go right now, but they can't. Is there something that they can do to ease their mind before they're able to go to confession once this whole thing is over?
Sure, and Pope Francis has reminded us of it. It's this idea of perfect contrition or contrition, really, that allows us to begin the process of transformation and acknowledges that we've done wrong and that we're sorry for it and that we want to embrace and be embraced by God's merciful love. And so, traditionally in the church, we've made a distinction between imperfect contrition and perfect contrition. The former, imperfect contrition being this terrified notion of God, or punishment, where I'm afraid that I'm going to be punished, and so I want to amend my life. It's imperfect because it's not recognizing the depths of God's love, but it's on the way. Now, perfect contrition is something that allows us to recognize in a deeper way God's love and realize that we've fallen short of that love in whatever sin that we're conscious of. And so it's a way of trying to put ourselves back into that love and living that love day in and day out.
And that is something we can do right now from the comfort of our homes and something that we can believe in.
For sure. And it has a way of showing itself in other things. So, acts of charity, for instance, are ways that we really, it's not that we're proving to God that we love him. It's just that this contrition, if it's really perfect, if it's really something that is bringing us out of ourselves and into the communion of divine love that is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, then it shows itself in how we relate to other people and what we're doing in our homes with ourselves or with our parents or siblings, or how we're relating to our neighbors. It's a way of letting that contrition be embodied really in more than just words, in how we act and what we do. It's really a full transformation, if you will.
I love that, and we don't have to wait until this whole thing's over, and we can get back into confessional to start doing that, and to believe in it, and to forgive our neighbors, and to love our neighbors, and to show them that we're sorry for the ways we've wounded them. One of the things I've heard from a good priest friend of mine, and that our church teaches, is that when we sin, we're sinning against God and our community. And sometimes we just go to confession and we're like, all right, I'm good now, without ever mending that broken relationship. And that's something that right now we can do. We can pick up the phone, we can mend those broken relationships that might have been broken based on our own sin.
Yeah, and what you're saying just kind of brings up for me, knowing a little bit about the history of reconciliation or confession. We go to confession perhaps more today than people did in the early church, because in the early church it was kind of a last ditch option for those who sinned after baptism, and it was a public thing. So there was no such thing as just private confession in the first few centuries of the church. That's something that the Irish, my ancestors, helped to contribute to civilization. But in the early church, it was a public confession of sins with a long period of penitence, of enrolling in what was called the order of penitence, and it was a way of acknowledging that we have sinned grievously, a grave sin. So confession was mostly for those sins that really separated us from God and community, what we call today grave or mortal sins. And it wasn't something that was just like, well, I told a little white lie, or something like that. It was something that was more encompassing, or more, I should say, uh, more focused on those sins that really destroyed our relationships. And so bringing them back in to the community was something that confession did.
And would you say that it's fair to say that, although, which is crazy, by the way, thank you, Irish, for giving us Guinness and for giving us private
Yeah.
confessions, that it's crazy from going to what it was to what it is, but that the reality of what that sacrament does hasn't changed a ton, in that we are still called to bring those grave sins, and that the church has other ways for us to be forgiven of our venial sins, and things like spiritual direction that we can do if we're looking for some sort of counseling. Can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, the practice of confession has really ebbed and flowed in different directions throughout its history. And, the monks in Ireland and the northern part of Europe did kind of act like therapists and spiritual directors, and they weren't necessarily priests. So there was a therapeutic element to something like, um, that looked like confession. But you're right that there's this similarity that's running down the lines of confession throughout the years, and that's namely that we can bring our sins forward to God. Now, whether it's public or private, we bring them forward and acknowledge that we've fallen short of God's love, and that we want to be reconciled with God and community. And so when Jesus says to Matthew, or he says to Peter in Matthew, that he's giving him the power to bind and loose, that's the power to bring back into the community after having sent them away because they were such grave sinners, or they were really destroying the community. And so it's not so much, like they have the authority to, be in everyone's personal business about every little lie they tell or anything like that. It's really a bigger thing where it's reincorporation into the life of the community. Um, but you're right. I mean, it would probably take more than 10 minutes just to talk about all the differences and the evolution or devolution, sometimes people would say, of the sacramental practice. But definitely allowing ourselves to know of God's mercy, which we've already said is not confined to the sacrament, but is expressed in a special way through the sacrament.
Father Ryan, thank you for explaining the gift of the sacrament of reconciliation to us and what we can do with imperfect and perfect contrition and a little bit of the history of confession. I'm excited for when things open up again, but it's good to know of God's love in the immediate as well.
You bet. Well, thanks for your time, Jonathan. I really appreciate it.
We'll talk soon.